You don't need to wait for Star Wars Episode 7. You have Star Wars Threads of Destiny. So this is going to be the first time ever that I'm going to be reviewing a fan film. So in case you're unaware, a fan film is simply that. It's a movie made by fans, really for other fans. It's not a film that can be sold, as they obviously haven't got the rights to use the various kind of like characters and settings and things like that. So it's really made for a very low budget and really just kind of made for the love of the franchise. Now this one in particular, however, is a full-length movie. It's I think it's 1 hour 40 minutes long, so it is the length of your kind of your standard movie. So I thought I would give it a review. But being a fan film, I do have to kind of give it some leeway in the fact that it is going to be running on such a low budget that it's obviously not going to come anywhere near to that of a kind of regular studio film. That said, it is an entertaining film to watch. So let's tell you a little bit about Star Wars Threads of Destiny. So this movie has taken 9 years of development. So it's a long gestating project. It's a bit of a passion project from the people behind it. It's actually a Swedish film, but it is actually spoken in English, and there's something that I'll come on to a little bit later in regards to the acting. And the basic plot here actually takes elements from the prequel trilogy and the kind of the classic Star Wars and kind of blends them to one. It's actually set nearly 100 years after the events of the Return of the Jedi. And essentially the Republic is kind of, ruling the galaxy, and we've got this kind of almost like a shadow government, I suppose, who are made up of former sort of empire. I think they call this the Skenvi or something they call themselves, something like that. And basically they kind of are sort of jostling for power, just like you would have two political parties here in this kind of, in our world. So, if you're in America, you've got the Democrats and Republicans, for example, or in the UK, you've obviously got Labour and Conservatives, things like that, basically. So there's this particular planet that has got this kind of like very sort of like rare ore that's only available on this planet, and we have these sort of two powers ultimately sort of trying to court this planet into sort of joining either the Republic or this kind of like new empire. And both of them sort of send representatives. The Republic send 2 Jedi Knights, and the kind of this empire send this other guy who turns out to be Sith later on down in the movie. And one of the things I did like about this film, first of all, is when we sort of first see this kind of this empire, or Skelvin, whatever they're called, they almost play it like they're not straight bad guys. They kind of try and go down the diplomatic route. I thought, well, maybe they're kind of going to sort of play out to be not quite as just simply just evil bad guys. And maybe they have some sort of shades of grey in them. But that's not really explored any sort of further than that, ultimately. And they just do tend to be just the kind of the moustache twirling bad guys, if you see what I mean. And then, so the kind of the setup is very, very much like the prequel trilogy. And there's not any action in this movie until well over half an hour into it. It's the first time you'll see any action. So it is a slow moving film, and in that respect, it kind of reminds me of the kind of, say, the Phantom Menace, with these sort of trade routes and blah 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 and that kind of stuff. So it has elements of that kind of first prequel trilogy. You have the kind of the elements of the original trilogy. For example, we've got a princess who's being abducted, and it's up to the sort of good guys to save her. We've kind of got this Han Solo sort of type character who's the sort of pilot, things like that. There's kind of this, they go to this, black market area. So it's all very kind of just going through the pages. So I have to say, I don't think this is a particularly good example of originality. It really just borrows elements from previous Star Wars films and kind of throws them together to try and make this particular story. Now the story does make sense, I'll say that. It does kind of follow the narrative. It just isn't a particularly an original story, I don't think. Now, on to the main issues you're going to have with this if you're watching just as a standard film. Now, as I've mentioned, this is a practically zero budget film. I mean, all the money that is made for this is just put in by the filmmakers themselves. But it does show. So the effects on this movie are quite bad. Now, it's a mixture of a lot of green screen, which looks very, very obvious. If you've ever played the game Rebel Assault 2, which is going to show me age now, which is a PC game or a PlayStation 1 game, that was a game that was kind of an on-rail shooter that had sort of various sort of cutscenes in them. And this movie really reminds me of that. And that's the kind of quality of kind of special effects that you can expect. In fact, I would possibly say Rebel Assault was maybe even a little bit better. They do a kind of a decent job with some of the kind of the 3D models for these spaceships and things. We do see kind of quite a lot of spaceships flying around and things like that. So in certain shots of kind of scenery shots and establishing shots, it looks kind of okay. But when we actually have the actors kind of acting against this sort of green screen area, it just looks very, 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 very obvious and very, very cheap, which of course it is. So there you go. The acting themselves. Now, if I mentioned this is a Swedish film, they are actually speaking in English, but they all have accents. And obviously this isn't their first language, so it does come across as very stilted sometimes. And unfortunately, the acting isn't great. Now, I'm assuming none of these guys are professional actors, so again, you know, you have to kind of give it some leeway because this is a fan film. This is not a professional movie. But unfortunately, as you watch it, a lot of the actors, not all, but a lot of them just either overact. The bad guy, for example, the kind of the Sith guy, is just, you know, bad guy 101, how to act like a kind of, you know, an evil asshole, basically. Things like that. I guess the princess is, you know, she's very pretty, she's not too bad, although she looks like she's just wearing cosplay, I have to say. The thing I found quite interesting with this film is sometimes it's kind of, it doesn't know, it just throws away some logic. Like, we're meant to believe this Jedi, this Jedi sort of Padawan, this training Jedi, has fallen in love with this princess, literally in a matter of hours, and is essentially, you know, going to throw away his training to sort of fall in love with this princess and her to him as well, literally hours after meeting him. At least when you had the kind of the romance in the kind of the prequel episodes, it was built up over a long period of time. Here, they're kind of falling over each other, you know, after a very, very short time. It's kind of, you think, what? Come on, if these guys were Jedi, surely you wouldn't be acting like this just after a couple of hours. It's just a bit stupid. But, you know, like I said, this is not a professional movie. Again, I'll keep making that excuse for it. But unfortunately, when you're watching that film, it just doesn't come across as a particularly great example of what a fan film could be. There's obviously a lot of love input into this, and I applaud their efforts. But unfortunately, the end result is a little bit of a mixed bag. Now, it kind of is a little bit boring. Like I said, this could have been chopped down probably half the time, and maybe it wouldn't have been feature length, but it would have possibly been, you know, maybe a little bit more interesting. Like I say, you know, we don't have any action until over half an hour, 35 minutes into the movie, and the action is kind of very kind of quick, if that makes sense. It's not long drawn out action sequences, things like that. The costume department, they kind of use the kind of classic Star Wars, which I didn't really understand as well. It's going to be 100 years in the future. Why are we seeing old school Stormtrooper armour, for example, which is 100 years old at this point, and the Rebel Alliance uniforms are the same, things like that. I think maybe they could have adapted it a little bit better. If you look at for example, the prequel trilogy, obviously we had the sort of the armour of the clone troopers sort of really evolving into the Stormtrooper armour, and that was over a few years. Here, they're using the armour, which is essentially they're saying is 100 years old. It's not just the Stormtroopers. There's Emperor's Royal Guards. There's the kind of the rebel sort of look as well. The other thing I found kind of missing is the kind of the aliens. I mean, again, you can understand the budget. There's very little effects on regards to the kind of making alien makeup. We see a few, but it's more or less just people with kind of like blue face paint on and things like that, which I found odd. So they obviously spent a reasonable amount of money on the kind of the spaceships and things, and the kind of 3D effects, which I say weren't too bad, but I think maybe more time could have been spent more on the practical stuff as well. It's nice to sort of kind of see a feature-length fan film because it does feel like a proper film, but overall this is an amateur film. And although I applaud their efforts for kind of making this movie and kind of giving you kind of this sort of Star Wars universe, and it's interesting to maybe think of a Star Wars universe which is 100 years or so after Return of the Jedi, because you can kind of get away with whatever you want at that point. But unfortunately, this takes too many cues from the prequel trilogy. It just isn't very interesting. The acting, unfortunately, is a bit painful to watch. The special effects, you know, are very cheap, especially the green screen, and it's just too long, unfortunately. So yes, it's kind of an interesting film to watch if you're just a kind of a Star Wars enthusiast and you kind of can't wait for Episode 7. But overall, just as a kind of a film piece of entertainment, I kind of find it quite dull and kind of disappointing. I've seen better short fan films that are available, you know, on YouTube and things like that, that I think are probably better than this one. There you go. So I'm going to give this movie a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.